opportunity never comes knocking. You better go out and create the conditions for that opportunity to present itself. It's not like you're going to be in the house, well, you know, and just, there goes the opportunity knocking on the door. No. You have to help cultivate the conditions where the opportunity will present itself.
My guest, Adrian Wright, is currently serving as a contracting officer representative for the acquisition management team at the Federal Aviation Administration. His is a remarkable journey from the inner city community of Union Gardens in Kingston, Jamaica, to Eastern Airlines to the U.S. Capitol. He shares a story of mourning the loss of a brother to political violence and his best friend to a tragic accident. Anchored by a strict mother, buffeted by supporting friends in a conducive school environment, and spurred on by burning ambitions, Adrian repelled every challenge that life threw at him and found a way to keep on pushing. By the way, I'm Devon Harris, and you're tuned in to Keep On Pushing TV, where we share ideas and insights that are going to challenge and inspire you to keep on pushing and live your absolute best life. If you haven't done so yet, I invite you to subscribe to our channel, leave a thumbs up, give us a like, because it helps to grow the channel. Enjoy.
This is Keep On Pushing TV with Devon Harris.
Adrian, so good to have you. Thank you for, and welcome, and thank you for joining us on Keep On Pushing.
It's my pleasure, Pele. It's my pleasure.
Pele, not many people call me that.
We go back a lot. If ever that name is invoked by someone you go back way back with that person, okay?
Yeah,
there you are.
So I guess, for full disclosure, we know each other. We attended high school together. And the last time I saw you, I remember teasing you about your gray hairs, and you promptly reminded me or informed me that it's not that you're getting old, you're just getting distinguished.
Oh, yeah, you have the memory of an elephant, man.
But there are certain things that you don't remember. I'm like, well, But well, my friend, it's great to be chatting with you in this forum.
Pleasure is all mine, sir.
Yeah, man, let's go back, because I'm always interested in the journey, and you grow up with people and you don't always know the full story. So now that we're here, now that I have you in front of the world, I want to kind of dive into some of that story. So take us back to the beginning, those early years growing up in Kingston.
The early years, Pele, it was not in any way dissimilar to yours. I grew up in a tough, gritty inner city neighborhood. The biggest impact that had was during the 1980 election, when things got, you're well aware that I'm not telling you anything you're not aware of, but for the audience's sake, it was one of the bloodiest years, or the bloodiest year on record in terms of the fatalities surrounding election violence. And my brother fell victim to that. Not that he was, he was just he was a supporter of the PNP and wore his PNP button. Back in those days, people wore paraphernalia. They just wore it, and believe it or not, a simple thing just like that caused him to lose his life. Because somebody thought, hey, he was a PNP supporter and I'm a JLP over here and I'm going to kill this guy. And that was the end of that. And so, yeah, grew up in this tough, but Pele, I must admit that growing up with all of that, immersed in all of that, Arden High School was my rock, because it taught me how to operate on the other side of the railroad tracks, per se, because when I got to Arden in first form, I believe myself and Paul Littlejohn and maybe yourself, there was just a few of us that were from these gritty, from the gritty inner city. There was just a handful of guys. Mm-hmm. Most of the people that we saw had their, chauffeurs dropping them off, or their parents dropping them off at school and so forth. And that was just like amazing to me, as a kid, that time.
Yeah.
So Arden made it, Arden instilled in me certain, an appreciation for education, an appreciation for discipline, an appreciation to keep on pushing, essentially, because obviously everybody has adversities in life and we all encounter them. And I had my share while matriculating at Arden. And but I always got up.
Where in Kingston did you grow up?
I grew up in Union Garden, right, what I call it 2 Mile.
Right.
So you know that right after you pass Waltham Park Road, coming from downtown Kingston, we call it 2 Mile because it's not 3 Mile.
Yeah, exactly.
1 more mile from 2 Mile, not 3 Mile. So you have Union Garden, Dela Creek Park, you have Brotherton Avenue, Oakland Avenue, Chisholm Avenue.
Yeah.
This is right all off Spanish Town, Norman Lane. Greenwich Primary School, where I went to school at, at a primary level. So it wasn't, it was a space that, as a child, and if you had ambition, you aspired to get the hell out of there as quickly as you can,
Yeah.
So,
It's kind of interesting because I even today look at Halfway Tree Road as the line of demarcation, right? So those of us who come from below south of Halfway Tree Road, is really the other side of the track. And then we're attending school on the north side of Halfway Tree.
Side of the track, you got it.
Which is, a very, how did you find that, assimilating in an environment like Arden High School, coming from Union Gardens?
Well, Pele, I'm going to be surprisingly frank with you. It wasn't that tough for me at all, because you have to, if you do recall, I had relatives, I had cousins who had matriculated at Arden before. And, when you're in high school, I had to get common entrance, and so I have to pick 2 schools, and everybody, I picked the GC and the KC and the Georges, and, me, I picked Jamaica College and Arden High School. So I figured, I'd go to that elite all-boys school, or I'd end up at a prestigious institution like Arden, because that's what my cousins told me, that, you had this principal, her name was Miss Gale, and she was this, and she, and just all this about the school. And so, the short answer, Pele, it wasn't that very challenging. My mother, I was always in an environment, I grew up in the inner city ghetto, but my mother was she was the secretary for the Attorney General downtown in Kingston.
Mm-hmm.
And so I used to go to the Attorney General's office to meet up with my mom. And so I was this was from 4th grade in primary school. So I was exposed to the other side of the railroad tracks prior to even getting to Arden.
Yeah.
So then I remember when we were kids, we had to speak the Queen's English at home. Mom no, why you talk part to another house, Bridget? When you talk part, you can't, when you play ball with your bridge, Yeah, but when you come in the house, she doesn't tolerate you speaking patois. You have to speak the Queen's English, proper diction, and so forth and so on. So, when I got to Arden, I easily blended in. In fact, people assumed I was from uptown.
I got you. I'm going to get back to Arden days in a minute, but let's go back to your brother's killing. How did that impact you?
Oh, Pele, it was a terrible time. If you recall, I was quite the academic at Arden during those first 3 years. We had the third form challenge quiz, and it was me, my team versus Dave Olson's team in the finals. Dave had the Naresh Kumar and all the aviators, but I was on the other shift at that time. And so it was the cream of the crop of that shift. We couldn't compete. We were going up against Dave Olson and Naresh Kumar, man. I mean, come on.
By the way, I was on that team too, so don't.
Thanks for rubbing that little salt in the wound there. So I was an academic, man, up until about third form, and my brother's demise thankfully there was. I don't know if you recall Mrs. Walker. She was, I think she taught math, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But when that thing happened, because it happened during the summer holidays, and when we came back to school in September, for some, because it was in the Star and all that, but I never came back to school and made any grand announcement. But Miss Walcott knew, she knew that I had lost my brother, and she saw everything unfolding. I was academically detached.
Yeah.
I was getting grades I wasn't even used to, man. And it was, like I said, it took the better part of a year for me to kind of regain my footing. I came back to my original shift and, started associating with the people who, I was in first and second form with. And I don't know, I think having that social structure, because there were some people, Little John for one, Garfield Thompson. They were just people that I could just chat, have a conversation with. They understood, they knew the impact. It kind of altered the course of my life in the sense that, from a short-term perspective, in the sense that, I just, drifted away from the academic pursuit, so to speak. So by the time I graduated from Ardennes, I barely got out of there with about 5 or 6 subjects.
Yeah.
So I had to continue my matriculation up at Campion, doing evening school and so forth, and got about 4 more subjects during that time. But it took a while for the effect of, or the impact of Jason's death to kind of be mitigated, so to speak. Yeah, it wasn't easy. It's another keep on pushing story. It's about, I had 2 choices. I could go join up with the guys who were like, hey, Adrian, we'll go do this and we'll go do that and we'll go put it back on them board and whatever. Or I could just unplug and just find a new direction. And the latter was what I chose to do. Yeah.
You spoke about the impact that Ardennes had on you, high school had on you, which, is very similar to my story. I tell people all the time, from the time I was in 3rd form, 9th grade, all the way to 6th form, 13th grade, I was in school 6 days a week, right? Because you had a regular 5 days. And
yes.
then after that, there was track or school challenge or something. So it became a haven, right? Took you out of the old neighborhood away from
exactly, Pele. So it became a refuge, man, when it was time to go to, because it was like another world, like you talk about the demarcation of it was, when we all leave school at evening time and we all take shortcut around Phoenix Avenue and Pickle to Mango and I said, the house look like castle and all them things. It was being in another world. You like being taken away from your own reality, because your own reality was so depressing.
Yeah, exactly. Talk about depressing, and you mentioned a name earlier, man, and we were just talking before off camera, Paul Littlejohn. So you lost your brother at 3rd form, so you're 14 going on 15, and then you're 18, 19-ish, and
then you lose my best friend. Yeah.
I was just mentioning that, I just remember sitting in the church at this funeral and just zoning out because, my birthday is on Christmas Day and his is on Christmas Eve. And
you guys were like 1 day apart or something.
I'm like, this guy's only 1 day older than me and he's gone.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that, man.
Well, you may recall this, I couldn't show up at the church. I literally could not. I still think I was in denial. I honestly believe, because I remember that day I didn't go to school because the funeral was on a school day.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the day I got up and I was like, okay, the plan from last night is to go to Paul's funeral today. And I got up and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't go into the show. I couldn't do anything. It's like I just froze. And it just took a while. I remember Garfield came to visit me after the funeral because Garfield went to the funeral, and but it was like, kind of, what else? Adrian, but I just either I didn't want to see him like that, or I just couldn't wrap my head around that he was gone.
Mm-hmm.
Because prior to this whole thing happening, I was at his house. We were hanging out. I think the weekend before, I'm going to check him out. I remember what we cooked to this day.
Mm-hmm.
I remember what we cook. We need some flour and we'll cook a tin of bully beef.
You run a boat.
You run a boat. See? because at that time he had moved, and Paul didn't live in Bacto anymore. His mother had done fairly well in her Higgler business and had moved the family out of Bacto, or what we call Majestic Gardens today, and moved the family up to Havendale. Mm-hmm. And back then, Havendale was
one of the premier areas,
exclusive, And so I went up there, and back in those days, we never have cell phones. So when I see him, I say, come check me, or come check you, and because Ian Lewis had a bike, Ian used to come check me, or Lennox come check me, and we'll go check Paul, or so, we never have cell phones. Hell, we never have beeper, but we knew how to stay in touch when, So it was like a week or two later when I heard this, and I was like, you gotta be, this cannot be real. This cannot be real. So that too impacted me. But again, another keep on pushing. The lesson is about, when adversity and disappointment and these kinds of events, are right in your face. How do you respond? How do you respond? There are, there's a positive way. There are multiple negative ways, but usually there's a positive way or two. Mm-hmm. So, and I've just always elected to just learn the lessons from that. And the lessons was this thing called life is fragile. You juxtapose the loss of Paul with all the other losses I witnessed during 1980 during the election. Fragility of life. Nothing is guaranteed, and the worst thing is when you're gone and a man say, I said, boy, they used to rare, you'd rather a legacy, well, that's more positive. Boy, a man there, really gonna miss because it was this or it was that, and that positive legacy, you tend to be a part of conversations in perpetuity, rather
but Paul was that though. I mean, even at age,
Paul was that.
He left, we still talk about him fondly, not just because he's our friend, but I remember, training, and I was at the time already on one-man track team, and he was hanging out by the tree there.
We were your biggest supporters, Pele. I want you to know that. Me, Little John, Trace, the golf, because you're long distance. No guy couldn't touch that. And when you're down under the tree that behind the pathways, and Pele lap them people, and Pele lap all guy and what did I say? Pele! Yeah, man. So
we're hanging out with the slazens a bag.
I remember.
You inspired me to get one of them bags, but it came in handy because I did sports. I needed a place for all my gear.
Yeah, you could put, man, you could have put everything in there, man.
But I remember though, just being there training and, coming down to the end of the workout and being exhausted, and Paul was there just like cheering me on, challenging me actually. So
yes.
I remember that. So what in between all of those or the hardships and getting knocked off track and getting back on, what aspirations did you have growing up?
Oh, Pele, this one was an easy one because it wasn't really, while attending RDN, I had another cousin who was an air traffic controller. And so he was always all over the island. He was either at Sangster, or he was at Manly, or he was at Tinston Pen, or he was at Boscobel. So whenever he was at Tinston Pen, when I left Arden in the evenings after my football or whatever, because you're always, and you know this, whatever positive route there was before going back into the ghetto at night or in the evening, you were going to take advantage of that.
Yes.
I mean, if you aspired to something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You just, pardon me, Pele. Pardon me, Pele, my earplugs keep falling out. But if you aspire to something, if there was something positive, whether it was an after school track, whether it was after school practice, after school's challenge, quiz, whatever, activity that was positive, that allowed you to remain immersed in that, as opposed to getting on a bus and going back into the ghetto right after school, where something can easily go wrong, for lack of a better term. You took advantage of those things. So in terms of what I aspired to, I always loved airplanes. I always loved flying. I always loved anything to do that has to do with aviation. So that's where my love for this thing called aviation started, at Tinsipen Aerodrome. Ironically, where I live in a union yard, I could just walk from my yard, cut across the train line, walk up the runway, and I'm at the tower.
So you had an aerodrome right in your backyard.
Right in my backyard. I have this picture in my office today showing, I've forgotten the runway number for Tinsipen, but whether it's 13 or 31, but down at the south end of the, right, not the south end, but the eastern end. No, the eastern end would be, no, the western end of the runway. That's Greenwich Farm, the western end of the runway abuts 7th Street, a Greenwich Farm.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was just right there in my neighborhood. And so, yeah, I used to go over, and you know, a lot of the pilots, when they were going up or either making runs over to Boscobel, or they're running over to the aluminum plant, or they're even going to run to Montego Bay, you know, my cousin used to always allow me to, you know, like he'd show me how to, you know, do an approach, you know, give clearance for an approach. And so if he ran to the bathroom, I could tell, you know, a pilot, hey, you know, you have, the winds are out of the south at 5 knots. And, you know, I'd be able to look at the data and tell them, you know, because it's all written down. They use strips, old strips back in those days. Right. You just tell them what's on the strip, you know, and you give 6 Yankee, whatever, you know, you're cleared for landing, you know. And so I you know, started that, and then, you know, I started just taking these flights, going off to everywhere. I was off to Boscobel. I was soon. These pilots became, you know, we became friends. So, you know, a couple of pilots, I remember the pilot of this 337, he'd kill me today, I don't recall his name, but he piloted a Cessna 337, which was one of the push-pull, prop in the front, prop in the back, and it had the twin stabilizers and so forth. Very powerful airplane. And gave me the wheel a couple of times. We're coming in and we're just cruising along, and he's like, hey, it's not an autopilot, you want to just hold it? Yeah, you know, and just exciting stuff, you know, and I could, you know, change flight levels, you know, so I just point the nose down and, you know, just, you know, and trim the airplane, and I point the nose down, trim the airplane, gone to a new altitude, level off, you know, it was just, and that's really what's, because Pele, to be honest with you, while I was at Ardennes, or even shortly thereafter, even when I got the so-called dream job with Eastern Airlines, I never saw myself with the federal government. Mm-hmm. I never saw myself with the FAA, the premier aviation organization in the world. Never, that wasn't even part of my calculus. Yeah. And but I again just loved aviation, and it just continued from there. So yeah, you asked the question, you know, some people will go hither, thither, and yon. I can tell you it was just aviation. Yeah. So it's just interesting, as I hear it, is that you have an aerodrome with, you know, millions of dollars of equipment abutting all these inner city communities, right? It's like Union Garden, Greenwich Farm. It's right there across from. It's right there. And fortunately for you, that was your backyard, and you fell in love with it. So you mentioned Eastern Airlines. So let's talk about, you know, life after Ardennes. Yeah, so life after Ardennes, you know, like most of us, I think it was time a lot of us started looking at, you know, either leaving or going on up to UE, and UE was not a part of the calculus for me. You know, my mom had already made the decision. In fact, Paul Littlejohn, we had planned, because he was going to go to Howard University and I was going to go to the University of Maryland, and, you know, we're going to meet up. And so after Ardennes, I graduated in 1982. Like I said, I went on to Campion College for another year, do some more academic work. I, you know, got a few additional subjects. CNC back then, it wasn't GCE. And got those additional subjects. And by the time I got through with that, you know, and between 82 and 84, when I finally left, it was quite, because, you know, the opportunities weren't as abundant as I was while in Ardennes, after school activities. So, you know, to get to every day. and all kind of temptation, Richard.
Pause, man, because dude, talk to me about that, because I remember as rough as 1980 was, the scariest part, and I spent 2 extra years at Arden. The scariest part of my existence, and I call it that, was when I graduated, because there was no more school. There was no
Right. So it was a danger, because now, as my mom used to say, the devil creates work for idle hands.
Yeah,
and
time.
So I'm in this environment now most of the time, rude boy, I know so well, Adrian, brother get murdered. Ima step up now, Ima go be the man now, and Ray. And I never had aspirations of that. I never wanted that. I never, but things happen, people incurred in our neighborhood and massacred people. And so I had a decision to make. Do I want to live long enough to leave here? Or do I just want to keep a total hands off, which doesn't assure my existence beyond tomorrow?
It doesn't assure your safety.
And
they're going to say you get in gear.
So without getting into too much detail, I made the decision about my security. And I stayed alive until it was time to leave. And I finally left there in October of 1984. I came to the United States. Yeah. Joined my mom, yeah.
How did you get started at Eastern? What did you do there?
Well, I immediately came, and as soon as I landed in the States, I enrolled in what we call A&P school, which is Airframe and Power Plant Mechanics School. And they throw you an associate degree when you complete the course as well. So big deal. Not like anybody going to hire you with an associate degree, but you got the A&P certificate, which was what the airlines were looking for. And as soon as I got out of school, in no time, I was hired by Eastern. In fact, I was living here in Maryland and then relocated to Miami, which was the location that they wanted me to work. So I was living in Miami, man, living it up. It was the best job I ever had. Life was great. I was in a different city every other week because I had flight privileges. So I could go anywhere I wanted to, at any given time. And so I did that. And so I got to travel the world, and people always ask me what, aside from the US Congress, Eastern was probably the most egalitarian place I've worked. They didn't judge you by your skin, they just want to know how capable were you. So I was, when I started, I became a landing gear mechanic. I was working on landing gears on the L-1011. Back then we flew a lot of MD-80s, and we did a lot of maintenance work for Continental Airlines as well. So I was at Building 17, Miami International Airport. That's the landing gear shop. And ultimately, they gave me a chance to become a line mechanic. And while being doing line work, I became interested in the flight engineer concept. It just goes to show you I'm kind of always beyond the technology, because a few years, not knowing that at the time, but a few years later, that flight engineer position within the cockpit would become obsolete by computers, so, but anyway, I got my exposure to the cockpit too, and so forth. And so it was a dream job until, Eastern ultimately, we had some industrial disputes and we just went out of business, but it was a great time in my life. I really learned a lot about industry, private sector, operations, flight operations, and just the sheer dedication it takes for trained professionals to keep these airplanes in the air and keep them safe. Because, like somebody taught me a long time ago, when you're an A&P mechanic, you don't get to make mistakes. It's not like you push the, we can just pull the aircraft over here at 37,000 feet and check this blinking light. No, So there was what we call zero tolerance. So you had to be good at what you do. You can't button up an engine and leave a spanner in there, or not use the correct torque on a particular on a nut or a bolt or whatever. You just got to be. It's a science, and you had to use the manuals to tell you what the science was for that particular aircraft type.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was. I loved it. I loved it. In fact, when I got to Eastern, I what's the term again? When you kind of get to where you think you ought to in life, I was self-actualized.
Self-actualized, yes.
I felt at the time I was self-actualized.
Yeah.
I had a great place, and Roberto Duran was my neighbor, for crying out loud. The great Roberto Duran lost to Sugar Ray Leonard how many times,
exactly.
or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, life was great, and like I said, here comes another obstacle, which is what life is all about.
Mm-hmm.
The industrial action by the airlines, and we had a guy named Frank Lorenzo who was running Eastern Airlines. Wasn't very well liked, not to this day. I guarantee it. And he just ran the airline into the ground, and we were all out of work. Fortunately for me, I was just a young guy. I had about 5, 6, 7 years with the company at that time, and so I could pivot, and I knew that.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have any political training, but I came from, political family. My cousin is Bruce Golding, as you know, and my grandfather's brother, Tasha Golding, still has the distinction of being the longest serving speaker in the Jamaican Parliament. So I wasn't trained, but I had good political instincts. And when I came back to Washington, I was afforded an opportunity to work for the mayor of Washington at the time, Sharon Pratt Kelly. She had just replaced Mayor Barry, who was in a whole heap of issues. Great mayor, but he had some personal demons. Issues. Great mayor. Mm-hmm. He had some personal demons, and so she came into power, and I was working with this guy Adam. Adam brought me in, and there were always people who looked at me and said, "This guy has potential," and often extended me that hand, or afforded me that opportunity. So it was the same thing with the mayor's office. Adam, God, I can't remember these ladies' names. It's so sad, but Adam was, the one guy I was on the road with daily. And then, I was noticed by Reverend Jackson at an event for the mayor, and Reverend Jackson immediately hired me. By that time, there's a little piece of my life that we're not going to go into, but suffice it to say, it was another major obstacle.
Right. Yeah.
And again, had to emerge from that. And when I got hired by Reverend Jackson, I told him all about this. He said, "Hey, it's about character. And are you that character today?" And I'm like, "No." And he's like, "Okay, well, welcome aboard, and, and someday, use your story to help somebody." And, just haven't gotten to that yet. Been a little busy, but suffice it to say, I was with the Reverend and then the National Rainbow Coalition, learned a lot, worked with some amazing people. Reverend Sharpton, worked with Frank Watkins, who's still with the Rainbow Push organization to this day. Jesse Jackson Jr. was a colleague. Like I said, just tons of people that either looked at me and said, either this guy has that it, or he has something, or they knew specifically that we wanted him for this. Mm-hmm. And yeah, just, got, was a reverend for years, traveled all over the world. And then by chance,
before we go on to the next, so how important is it to, to take full advantage of opportunities? I mean, when you're given an opportunity to give your all, to put your all, to perform at a high level so that someone can notice you and go, "Hey, there's something about that guy or that girl."
We grew up in religious households, and so you remember that. And please, Devon, don't ask me to quote the Bible verse or anything like that. But I remember going to Sunday school and learning about this guy. He had God gave him 7 talents or some talent, but he was, God gave him a talent.
So let me help you out there, my friend. It's 10.
Or 10. All right. Hey, live TV, baby. What are you gonna do? So, but anyway, the essence of the lesson was that you were afforded these talents, and for you to waste them it's like an affront to God himself, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was more complex than, but that's how I summed it up in you know? And so when you talk about when an opportunity is afforded to you, because they didn't come plenty, it's not like opportunities were abundant and just, you know, just falling in place, and, you know, no, they were rare. But when those opportunities are afforded you, what I did is the advice I would give any young person today: make the most of that opportunity. Like there's no saying when opportunity comes knocking. Opportunity never comes knocking. You better go out and create the conditions for that opportunity to present itself. It's not like you're going to be in the house, well, you know, and just, oh, there goes the opportunity knocking at the door. No. You have to help cultivate the conditions where the opportunity will present itself. And so when I got those opportunities, I didn't look back. I took the bull by the horn and went above and beyond in terms of what I was asked to produce or do or perform or bring to fruition. Mm-hmm. And people noticed it. People noticed it.
So that attitude, you know, took this young man from Union Garden, so the capital, the U.S. capital.
Yes, sir.
I'm not talking about, you know, the capital.
The U.S. capital, baby. We're not talking about, you know, some, you know, backward third world. We're talking about the, you know, despite recent events, a country that is still highly respected in the world and is seen as the world leader. So yeah, to end up in the U.S. Congress, again, had no plans of it, had no aspirations. The path just kind of took me there. And, you know, I was commenting earlier that while working for Reverend Jackson, it was another one of those things where, having had that opportunity, another opportunity came knocking. Not necessarily, I created the conditions for the opportunity to present itself. And Congressman DeFazio at the time, who was a U.S. congressman from all places, Devon, Oregon. Oregon.
Yes, nothing in common.
Not New York, not Florida, not Atlanta, Georgia, no, Oregon. Sent his chief of staff to meet with me, and just because I did the event that day and I just concluded speaking, I went back to my chair and this person just came and whispered to me and said, you know, Congressman DeFazio would like to meet with you. And so I remember the same evening we got back to headquarters, I told Jesse, said, hey, this congressman wants to meet me. And he said, oh yeah, that's Peter DeFazio from Oregon. I'm like, Oregon? And so, you know, I was just, I said, okay, I'll meet with him. You know, what's the worst thing? You know, I'm just gonna meet with him. Met with the man, and long story short, he offered me a job. He wanted me to become his legislative analyst and to bring my expertise in the area of aviation to his office, since he was serving on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And more specifically, he was also on one of the subcommittees, a subcommittee that was called the Aviation Subcommittee. And that's where Adrian went in there and left my mark.
Yeah. Yes. I was about to ask you about that. Talk to us about the work you did and the bills that you worked on, and that you know, still, you know, creating an impact in the world of aviation. Well,
the first big piece of legislation, I recall it with alacrity, is the Air 21 Aviation and Reinvestment Act, Aviation Infrastructure and Reinvestment Act of 2001, I think it was. And President Clinton obviously was president at the time, and we worked on a number of provisions. I can't go into a lot of them because obviously, let's just put it this way. Could you hold just a second, Pelle? Hold just a second. Hold just 1 second, because I think sometimes a picture speaks 1,000 words. So hold on, let's take a look at this. You asked me about the very first piece of legislation. This was in 2001.
No.
So this was an award I got from the U.S. Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigations for some, and again, can't go into the details specifically of the work, but for some work that I did for the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, essentially to create stronger enforcement mechanisms for wayward manufacturers who wanted to introduce into the marketplace what we call unapproved aircraft parts. In other words, these parts were not, for example, strength tested or subjected to the tensile strength that they should be subjected to be able to be installed on aircraft for certain systems, hot system, cold systems, you name it,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this was a lucrative industry out there. Guys were making what we call bogus parts and selling them, and then the aircraft would drop out of the sky. It was really a problem in the general aviation community, but there were instances also where the Part 135 and 129, the commercial carrier, those guys were also impacted as well. So that's essentially was one of the major pieces of the Aviation Investment Reform Act of the 21st century. I had several provisions in there. Again, it was signed into law by President Clinton in 2001. Another, was the whole, we had a congressional inquiry into I don't know, you probably recall the Everglades, Air Florida crash.
Yes.
And that was my very first.
Was that
Value Jet, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Value Jet and in the Everglades. And that was my very first congressional investigation, oversight hearing, as well as look back into, causes and what could we do as the government as the federal government to improve the regulations so that not just Value Jet, but any other carrier wouldn't encounter a situation like that ever again. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we came up with, we had stronger mechanisms to ensure that hazardous materials, when placed in the cargo holds, are subject to more rigor and rigorous systems to ensure that even if you do have hazmat, that it's not hazardous. In other words, okay, if something's hazardous or it's labeled hazardous, the contents must be inerted somewhat so that there's just no possibility of an explosion or fire or anything of that nature.
Yeah.
So what we did was just put in a few measures and mechanisms to ensure that, particularly for the freight community and the commercial carriers, because a lot of people just don't know this. A lot of your airlines that you're getting on out there, they carry cargo. Shocking, yeah, but they carry cargo, okay? Yeah. So they too had to be made aware that, hey, there are the stronger mechanisms here in place to ensure that hazardous materials are no longer a threat to the safety of an aircraft.
Yeah. So so you end up on the Capitol working in aviation, and now you're at the FAA. Talk to us about your role there.
The transition from the Capitol to the FAA really was another keep on pushing moment, because here in Washington we have political appointees that are a dime a dozen. And at the time, the chairman of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee was a gentleman named, oh my God, I'm forgetting Mr. Oberstar's name. Mr. Oberstar was the chairman of the Transportation Committee at the time. And his thing was, I was the senior staffer, again, working for Mr. DeFazio, who was the ranking member, one of the ranking members on the committee at the time. And he wanted me to take a political appointment over at the FAA, whatever. But my background. I'm an old wrench turner. I know the regulations back and forth as it relates to, what I do. And I was considered myself more professional than political. And I can't say the chairman was pleased, but he agreed with me ultimately when I told him that I was not interested in a political appointment. And so I went over to the FAA in a career professional capacity back in 2001, and have been there ever since, and gone through a few. I initially got there in the Suspected Unapproved Parts Program office at Dulles International Airport. Obviously, I got to the Suspected Unapproved Parts. I just showed you that. So it was kind of, it was my area. It was what I,
where you cut your teeth.
Exactly. And then ultimately, ultimately left the airport and came back to headquarters on Capitol Hill back in 2008, I believe, in the Office of Rulemaking, where, you work with the economists and the attorneys, and now you're implementing, your you're doing rulemaking. So if it's a noise issue on Long Island, or if it's a high altitude issue with respect to communications and navigation, or whatever the case may be, you address the issue via rulemaking. That is, utilizing the Administrative Procedure Act to say, here, the government, publish in the Federal Register, the government intends to whatever. We are seeking comments on blah, blah, blah. Here's what we plan to do. And then you disposition those comments, and then move on, all in an effort to, not make something so arduous that it's cost prohibitive, but and not so lenient that it doesn't have much teeth, but sort of just try to strike that middle ground, where it does make an impact, but it's not so cost prohibitive that it would put people out of business.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that's yeah. So, and then where I am today, I ultimately became a contracting officer representative. In fact, I was always a contracting officer representative, but I was just never worked in the field. I always had the certifications to do that job, but just never did. But once I came back to headquarters in 2008, that's what I've been doing since. So I administer over 13 contracts for the federal government. Can't talk about who these people are or anything like that, obviously, but it's a challenging job description because you become the face of the government. But it really challenges me, and because it's not a cookie cutter type operation, you have to actually use your cerebral skills and thought processes, and we adhere to this Bible called the acquisition management system, and as long as you're within the scope of that, it gives you some latitude. So in that sense, it really just challenges me, and I really love it. Obviously being a civil servant today isn't exactly we get thrown into the political mill machine at times, but you just have to hold your tongue and understand that you are a civil service professional, and you can't go wallowing in the weeds out there. So a lot of times it just takes a lot of and again, I learned it from Arden. I learned that in cadet corps discipline. Sometimes you just have to, you want to say things, but it's not in the interest of you or your organization to do that. So you bite your tongue, and Agreed. That's part of the discipline. Yeah.
So talking about discipline, we know that mommy was a disciplinarian, and
oh Lord.
Here she is in her mature years, and you are now her caregiver. Talk to us about that response.
Well, we've been the theme of what we've been talking about this afternoon seems to be, adversity. What do you do with adversity when adversity arises? What do? Sometimes you have two choices. Sometimes you have 20, but sometimes 19 of the 20 choices are bad, and the one out of the 20 is,
Mm-hmm.
So again, this was just another adversity. I never anticipated. My mother was the healthiest person I know. Growing up as a kid, my mother was just the healthiest person we knew. Mom was like an athlete, and even after she finished her years working in the States and she returned back home and she bought her place in Falmouth, she was walking up the hill over to the beach and back. And she was just, she was just that type of woman. So imagine, much to my consternation, when she took ill, my stepdad at the time, he had Alzheimer's, so she became caregiver, and I think to the exclusion of her own health. Mm-hmm. And a lesson I've learned myself.
Yeah.
And he ultimately passed away. But just prior to him passing away, Mom, I saw her, I was talking to her, FaceTiming her one day, and I was like, Mom, you don't look like yourself. You need to get on a plane and just let me know what time you're getting in. We'll go to the doctor. Long story short, she came up, went to the doctor. Mom was in renal failure. Nobody knew it. She was an absolute renal failure. So she had to get on dialysis. So come this December, it'll be 3 years that she's been with me. And my role has been caregiver in those 3 years. There are tough days. They're good. They're good days. But ultimately, what you go back to is to the thought that what this woman sacrificed and gave up so that I could be where I am today. So every time I get a little, oh man, I'm either so tired or I'm so exhausted or I'm this or my that, I go back to that thought and it just picks me right up and I keep on pushing, baby. Yeah, I keep on pushing.
Because she ended up having kidney transplant, did she?
She did, and that was so fortuitous. Again, that's another thing. Wasn't an adversity, but a complete blessing because when she got placed on the kidney transplant list, come on, nobody thinks that folks are going to get a transplant in a year. Come on, it doesn't happen.
Yeah,
it just doesn't happen. All the folks that I've talked to, whenever we've gone to the appointment, say, "Hey, Johnny, how long you been on dialysis, and how long have you been waiting for a kidney?" "Oh, I've been on dialysis for 40 years. I've been waiting for a kidney 3 years now." Or so, "Oh, I've been on dialysis for 8 years, and I've been waiting on a kidney for 7 years now." So there was just no way I could have conceived that she got a kidney when she did. So it was just an amazing blessing. And so 2 months ago, I think back in August, she got the was it September she got the transplant. And so we're about 2-3 months into her post care now. Post recovery is 9 months, so it's still early days yet.
yeah.
But she is doing remarkably well, considering she used to take a plethora of medication. Now it's down to about half of that plethora, but she's making progress. Her blood sugar is under control now. The anti-rejection pills are less, So yeah, it's slow progress. But like the doctors keep reminding me, it's a 9-month process. So we're still early days yet.
Yeah. That's good news, though. I think you're heading in the right direction. So
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That's awesome. Boy, we're having this conversation the day after Thanksgiving, and I speak all the time about the fact that we shouldn't leave just the one day of the year, Thanksgiving Day, to give thanks and be grateful. Yeah, and life is never perfect, and we're talking about your life in particular, our life collectively, that we have experienced some rough spots, man. But it really sounds to me like there's a lot that you have to be grateful for, Adrian.
Extremely, a lot to be extremely grateful for, a lot to be thankful for. Most notably, obviously, my mom and my children. They haven't made me any less proud. They're accomplished young adults doing their thing and making a positive contribution to society. I'm really thankful for a lot, because every time I look back and think, where I could have been, or what there were just so many opportunities to fail, just more than there were to succeed. But if it's one thing that's a constant in this life, Devon, and this, remember, you're the king of keep on pushing this thing called life, or through this thing called life. The one constant is change. So one needs to have an innate adaptability. Just knowing that what you see out there on the horizon today, there's going to be some changes. Mm-hmm. There's going to be some changes. And so you just have to have the innate ability to adapt. And, because long are the days. I remember when we were kids and you heard the adults talk, "Oh, I'll work at the factory, or I'll work at that office there for 30 years. And, that's very rare today. That's I don't even think it's realistic today.
Indeed.
So again, talking about that constant being change, you have to be a sort of a change management specialist in your own personal life, and if you equip yourself with that skill set, you can take on this 21st century world.
Yeah, I like that. It's a great place to end. Become a change management specialist in your own life. In your own life. Oh, you're trying to take my work?
I would never. Before we go, let me just say this, and I think you can conclude this already on your own. But Garfield, myself, Lennox, the Key Bridge, and then we're still, form part of the circle today. We are extremely proud of you, man. we are extremely proud of you. Every time, when we invoke Pele name, usually it's about something positive. I remember when that she's a charming analyst on Anchor on NBC. Oh my God, what's her name? Dylan came up to Up Park Camp, man, and you just showed. I was so proud. I was just so proud to be a Jamaican that day, man. When
right.
Yeah, I was, because she was, I think you guys were sitting on a track and you had you were showing them what you used to practice on in terms of for the bobsled and I was just so proud to be a Jamaican that day when I saw that piece. I was like, man, Pele, let's go on, Reja.
Well,
keep on pushing me over.
Well, my friend, I mean, it's just, I don't know, the desire, I guess is a word, from we were in school, me training as hard as I did because I wanted to make my school and my friends proud of my efforts and my accomplishment. That has continued. And so I appreciate the comments, man.
Clearly. One thing we knew, Pele, was that, like Bolt is a naturally gifted athlete.
Yeah.
You were the antithesis of that. You weren't necessarily naturally gifted, but you were the hardest working athlete we ever came across in our lives to this day.
Yeah.
Nobody worked as hard. Pele, you remember you used to come and train before school started morning time.
Of course, but you know what's so funny? I say that all the time with Adrian, that I'm under no illusion that I was the most talented person in school, but I better win.
But nobody could outwork you.
Like me.
Nobody worked like you. You put us to shame, man.
No, man. But dude, I never had the skills that you and Paul had on the soccer field, and a brother had to distinguish himself.
Yeah, man. Well, you most certainly did, sir. And to this day, you keep on doing it.
But my friend, wow, what a treat, what a pleasure. Thank you for joining us here. And
this was an absolute treat for me, man, because it seems like we haven't had a conversation. I think the last time we spoke this deeply was at that get-together in New York. And Gilzine was there, and Corey, and you, and me, and I think Dugan was there too, if I'm not mistaken.
The older Dugan, yeah.
The older Dugan, and a couple of the ladies, Janet Blackwood, and So we haven't really talked this deeply since. But again, just exceptionally proud of you, man, and keep on doing what you're doing because you really do provide motivation for people who have the good fortune of watching you and hearing you and listening to your broadcast.
Indeed, and very proud of you too, bro. And people are going to be inspired by your story as well. You'll be motivating some people. So thank you for all that you have done and continue to do. Keep on pushing, friend.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. You, sir, keep on pushing. Bet.